Here is a city that taught the whole world how to make things, and then could not figure out how to keep its own people. Detroit built the assembly line, put America on wheels, and for one bright decade in the middle of the 20th century, it was one of the richest cities on the planet. Then it emptied, not in a war, not in an earthquake. Slowly, decade after decade, until the same streets that once held nearly 2 million people held barely a third of that. The factories that built the modern world built a city they would later walk away from. Why is this place like this? Look at one pair of numbers. In 1950, Detroit had about 1.85 million people, the fourth largest city in the United States, swollen by the auto boom. By 2020, it had about 639,000. It lost roughly two-thirds of its population, somewhere over 1 million people gone from inside the same city limits. And that last part is the detail most people miss. The city did not shrink on the map. Its footprint stayed almost exactly the same, about 139 square miles, city of Detroit. So picture it. The same boulevards, the same water mains, the same school districts and streetlights and bus routes, all built for a city of nearly 2 million, now stretched across a third of the people to pay for them. You sometimes hear that Detroit lost 1 million people, and that's true. But the harder fact is that it kept all the infrastructure of a city it no longer was. That gap, full-size city, fraction of a population, is the whole story. The question is how a place gets there. The lazy answer is one phrase, white flight, and white flight is real and we'll get to it. But if you stop there, you get the order of events backwards, and the order is everything. The first thing that left Detroit was not people, it was the factories. Here is the part almost nobody leads with. The auto industry built Detroit on tall, dense, multi-story plants packed into the city, because that's how factories worked in 1915. But by the 1940s and 50s, the assembly line wanted something else: long, flat, single-story buildings where machines and conveyors could sprawl sideways. And that kind of space did not exist in a crowded city. It existed out past the edge, on cheap suburban and rural land. So the car companies did the rational thing. They built the new plants out there and let the old urban ones wind down. And there were extra reasons to leave. A sprawling single-story plant on farmland was cheaper to buy, easier to automate, and, for the companies, further from the dense, heavily unionized workforce of the old city core. The move was efficiency and labor strategy at the same time. The jobs walked out the door before most of the people did. Detroit was already bleeding manufacturing work in the 1950s, while the city was still near its peak population. Years before the unrest of 1967, that usually gets the blame for the whole decline. Think about what that means. The single most cited turning point happened after the economic floor had already started to give way. The riot didn't empty Detroit. It accelerated an exit that was years underway. This is the underrated first cause, and it's the one that gets skipped because it's not dramatic. Detroit's collapse started as a problem of physical space, old multi-story factories that simply could not hold the new. Horizontal way of building cars, not as a problem of who lived next to whom. The people problem came second, and it followed the jobs. Now add the second engine and watch how it compounds. As the plants moved out, the federal government was paying for everyone to follow them. After the war, government-backed mortgages, FHA and VA loans, made it cheaper to buy a brand-new suburban house than to stay. And the new interstate highways made it possible to live 30 miles out and still reach a job. But that money was not handed out evenly. Through redlining, federal lending maps graded Black neighborhoods in the urban core as too risky for loans. So the subsidy that built the suburbs largely went to white families. And the families left behind in the city were locked out of the very wealth building everyone else was handed. That is the white flight, but now you can see it for what it was. Not a mood, a machine. Jobs pulled out, highways and cheap mortgages opened the exit, and policy decided who got to use it. And the highways did something even more direct than carry people away. Building them physically demolished dense city neighborhoods, many of them Black. Clearing the path for the same suburbs the residents weren't allowed to finance. The exit ramp was paved through the front room. Then came the third blow, and this is the one that turned a steady leak into a flood. From the 1970s, foreign carmakers, Japanese above all, ate into the market share of Detroit's Big Three, and auto employment across the region fell for decades. A one-industry town now had a shrinking industry. Fewer jobs meant fewer people meant a smaller tax base. But the city still owned the same 139 square miles of pipes, roads, sewers, and streetlights to maintain. And here is the cruel arithmetic of a shrinking city that almost no one sees coming. When you lose half your people, you don't get to turn off half your costs. The pipe under the empty street still has to be pumped. The road past the vacant lot still has to be plowed. So each person who left quietly raised the bill for everyone who stayed. Higher taxes and worse services on the same infrastructure, which gave the next person one more reason to leave. That's a doom loop, and once it starts, it feeds itself. By 2013, the math broke completely, and Detroit filed the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history, somewhere around $18 to $20 billion in liabilities. Warning, that figure is debated because so much of it is unfunded pensions. A city built for $2 million simply could not be paid for by $600,000. So here is what Detroit actually reveals, and it's bigger than Detroit. A city is not just its people. It's a fixed body of concrete and pipe sized for a certain number of them, and that body cannot shrink as fast as a population can. When you bet an entire metropolis on a single industry, you tie the whole city's fate to one set of decisions made in a few boardrooms. And when those decisions are about where to build, not just what. The city has no vote. Detroit didn't collapse because it ran out of talent or grit. It collapsed because the thing it was built around could pick up and move, and the city couldn't. Drive through some neighborhoods today, and you'll see it in one image. A single occupied house on a block, surrounded by empty lots gone back to grass, prairie growing through the grid of a city that planned for crowds. That is what a city looks like when its body outlives its purpose. Next time, we go to a place with the opposite disease, a boomtown that grew so fast around one resource that it can't build homes fast enough, and the price of staying is eating its own workers alive. This is Locanomics. If this changed how you see the city around you, subscribe. There are 100 more of these.